Well, it's nice to see all of you tonight, and I thought I would just take a few minutes and discuss a little bit about Michigan politics in Lansing. Some of the governors, including, of course, James Turner, who was a candidate for governor. I've had a lot of experience, a lot of fun in history. I served for 20 years on the Michigan History Commission and was on the bicentennial of the U.S. Constitution Celebration Commission, State Historical Society, and numerous other events, and probably one of the most exciting was being on the commission that celebrated Michigan's sesquicentennial. So it's been fun, and those years, both my experiences in politics and in history, has taken me throughout the state of Michigan, and I've had the opportunity to visit, I think, every town in the state. If not, I might have missed one or two. And so I did a quest one year with Hugh McDermott with the Detroit Free Press, and we visited every Michigan governor's grave. And of course, except the one we can't find, he was a governor who lived in Marshall. And he was lost in Pernambuco in Brazil. And so that's a story in itself. But Lansing has played, of course, as the center of Michigan politics, a very interesting time. Give you a little background. Michigan, this was what this town was known as for the first years, as Michigan, Michigan. And George Peck was first postmaster. He was also master of the first master of Masonic Lodge 33 here in Lansing. But the state, when Michigan became a state, after that conflict that we'd had with Ohio, which is just a great, famous Toledo War, and that's when Michigan and Ohio were questioning the strip of land south of the Michigan border, included Toledo on the Erie Canal. Michigan wanted Toledo badly, can you imagine, in those days, because it was right on the Erie Canal. And in 1805, to give you an example, in 1805, just to give an example of what the population areas were, Detroit had 550 people. Fort Dearborn, which today is known as Chicago, had 160 people, and Toledo had over 2,000. And Toledo was supposed to have been the metropolis of the area, but it didn't. And of course, because of the Great Lakes, Chicago ended up being the major city in the Midwest. But it was interesting because they settled what they called the Frostbite Convention in Ann Arbor. They settled on what the boundary would be. And you know, one of the things that's interesting, just as a technicality, Michigan was officially a state in 1837. If you look at the centennial stamp of Michigan, it's 1835 to 1935. But the sesquicentennial stamp is 1837 to 1987. And the reason for that, after that Frostbite Convention, Michigan voted to become a state. But they forgot a technicality. And that is, if you're going to become a state, you're only entered by a vote in Congress. And the state was held up on that basis. They held it back for two major political reasons before we became a state, an official state. And one of the main reasons is that Jackson was concerned about the electoral votes, because his vice president at that time, Van Buren, was up for election, and by the way, was the last sitting vice president to be elected president until George Bush. So it's not a very common occurrence that happens. And they held off, and Ohio fought, and Indiana, because remember, they were in an 1805, I think, 1808 or 10, something like that, as early states. And then there was the question of slavery. And are we going to be Kansas, Missouri, and all that, Kansas and Missouri. And the question was, we're going to be a free slave or what have you, and they had to put in Arkansas first, because it was a slave state, then we came in. Supporting us, by the way, was a famous senator from Missouri, Thomas Hart Benton. And we were opposed by Daniel Webster, who was the senator who opposed Michigan becoming a state. So with that settled, and then one little sidelight, by the way, to get a kick out, is that they decided, Stevens Mason, the boy governor, and Senator Cass, Territorial Governor Cass, and Governor Cass, I mean, he was never governor, he was territorial and senator. But what was so interesting about that is that they went to Jackson. Cass and Stevens went to Jackson and said, we want to be a state, and this is in that 1835 period, we want to become a state, and therefore, to show you our sincerity, we've named some counties after you and your cabinet. And to this day, they're known as the cabinet counties. And of course, Ingham was Secretary of Treasury. Eaton was Secretary of War. Berry was a Postmaster General. Berrien was another Secretary of War. And then you had Van Buren, Vice President, Calhoun, Vice President, and of course Jackson County. And then, any of you familiar where Livingston County is? He was Secretary of State. Okay? So those are the cabinet counties. Well, they used this kind of as a good faith bribe. Didn't work. So we became a state in 1837. The capital stayed in Detroit from 1837 to 47. In all the research I've done on this and the reading, there were two reasons. Number one, there was a kind of a negative feeling, a bitter feeling of people living outside of Detroit towards Detroit. Now that was 1837, 38 in there. And so this anti-Detroit feeling isn't something that's new. And secondly, it was too close to Canada because of the War of 1812, when we had the conflict in Detroit and all the problems. And then the Battle of the River Raisin in that war, 1813, when all the Kentuckians were massacred. It was the largest massacre in Michigan history, the Battle of the River Raisin. And so they decided in 1847 to move it to Lansing, Michigan. There wasn't a town here. There wasn't a town. And you hear all of these stories. Like I said the last time I made this presentation, I said, you know, it is so interesting as I've traveled around the state, the things that people bring up to me the most are, number one, well, you know, Lincoln visited here. Well, I said, oh, really? And I get that in Howell all the time. And various places. Lincoln visited Michigan only one time. And that was in 1856. He gave the Boiling Pot speech in Kalamazoo, representing John C. Fremont. The only other time had been prior, when with the French and Indian Wars, he had gone up to the Detroit River, but had never landed. And the other thing that you hear in places, you know, Jerry, Adrian was considered to be the capital for the state. Every town you go in was going to be a capital for Michigan. And I think there could be some validity in it, because probably every local state representative or senator at the time, probably as kind of a favorite son kind of thing, introduced a bill or something to name it for those. The serious contenders, of course, one of the close ones, very close, was Marshall. And they had it until they went to bed that night. And during the night, legislators moved against it, and they wanted a very neutral place. The second place, and almost equal to Marshall, was DeWitt, because DeWitt was a community, and they thought about having DeWitt. And so that's why Lansing, Michigan, to this day is called a city in the forest, because they actually, it was all covered with, all covered with trees and all this type of thing, with growth. And so they came in, and they started clearing it, and they built, we had the Capitol, where the old Woolworth building is downtown. And then 1879, we built the new Capitol that we had, the 1879 Capitol. But I think it's interesting to note also that while they were doing this, you had no streets, nothing. They had planks, no place to stay. And the sessions, of course, were very brief during that period of time. You didn't have the long sessions that you do now, and the salaries and this type of thing. Those were the days of something unique in the area of government and politics. They called it public service. It wasn't a profession, as it's become pretty much today. And so Lansing now has become the center for all of the activity. And while they were building it, have you ever heard of Lansing Township? It's only 2 townships in America, only 2, are in 5, and I think Lansing Township 6, non-contiguous parcels. They are not connected. You have Lansing Township in the city of Lansing, and you have it up by the Holiday Inn in East Lansing. You've got it going down Michigan Avenue, and so you have all these non-contiguous areas. Now, the best thing is, how would you like to be the Lansing Township Police Department? how would you like to be the Lansing Township Fire Department? Which fires do you hit? Well, that was a problem for a lot of years. Then finally, they came to an agreement where they have a quid pro quo kind of an arrangement. And if you live in Lansing Township and there's a major crime going on, Lansing police will, hit it. But if you have a bicycle stolen in Lansing Township, then you can wait and call them on the bicycle, something like this. Fires, they work together on stuff like that. But Lansing, as a seat of government, had many characters who came here. And let me get back just a little bit. I want to mention Turner. In 1854, you had various governors. You had a couple of Whig governors. You had Democrats. They did not have, in this state at the time, a Republican governor. And in 1854, the Republican Party nominated Kingsley S. Bingham, who was a Democrat, from Green Oak Township, and George Coe, who was a fusion candidate from, actually he was from Coldwater, and then they nominated a state treasurer who was state treasurer, and he was from the Papa, Bangor area over there. And what they did is, the issue that brought this new party and sold it, and were the anti-slavery Democrats, the Fremonters, the Free Soilers, the Whigs, and the Greenbacks. They all met and said, we want a new party, because if you'll remember that in 1856, when Buchanan won that election, that he would not take a stand on the slavery question. And Michigan was really one of the most abolitionist states. For those of you who know your Civil War history, was a major abolitionist state. New York, most of the eastern states, it was a money issue. But it wasn't Michigan, and a lot of the western states, these became more of a cry for abolitionism. There are all kinds of areas. In fact, there are some questions that did the Underground Railroad really come up this far? That's questionable, but on occasion, sure, it could have. I mean, there isn't any question about that. But it went primarily, good old Highway 12, went across to Detroit and then into Canada. See, Canada's never had prohibition, or have they had slavery? And there are a lot of stories about the judge in Detroit. The slave catchers brought in, before they could leave the state, had to come to a judge, and he had to give them permission to take the 2 slaves. He was 2 stories up in a building, and he went and said, excuse me just a minute, went into the outer room and jumped out the window and took off so he wouldn't have to make a ruling, and so they couldn't leave. And so that was one of the big questions. So in 1854, they elected the very first Republican governor. The types of individuals that were governors at the time were business people and people of means, and it was a hard-line kind of politics, and they were very, very independent people back then. And then we talk about the House one tonight. We're talking about James Turner House. Turner got caught in a kind of a real political twist when he was running. The Republicans had had a governor, the new party, on the anti-slavery ticket, and that was the big issue. And then they came in, and James Turner from Lansing. Now this is interesting. Turner ran and was defeated by Edwin Winans from Hamburg Township. Edward Winans would have been the Indiana Jones of his day. He was incredible. But the major issue is people were upset during those prior Republican administrations of the bad roads. And they were said, we do not have good wagon roads. I mean, here's cars. Back then, they were complaining there were not enough good roads for wagons. And I think that, to me, I had to kind of chuckle, looking at that one. But when Turner ran, and he lost, and it was a close election, it was only 8,000 or 9,000 votes, and he was the candidate for governor of Lansing. Interestingly enough, there have been no governors, U.S. senators, elected from the city of Lansing. And at one point, if you go over to Eaton County, we had, and this you would think would be funny in those days, Frank Fitzgerald in the 30s. He got elected in 32, and the landslide lost 34, won again in 36. And his lieutenant governor, Dickinson, You had Frank Fitzgerald from Grand Ledge and Dickinson, Lauren Dickinson, from right outside of Charlotte. So here Eaton County had both the governor and the lieutenant governor. That probably won't happen again in your lifetime. Probably won't have both. You could conceivably make an argument for some of them that they were Lansing residents. Christensen, who became U.S. Senator, but he claimed Monroe was his home. And so that's where he was from. But isn't it interesting, the capital city, all the politics that goes on. And if you look around, the kinds of people are elected, the majority of all the candidates that we've had for governor who've gotten elected, and even candidates, came from very small towns. And when I did the thing with McDermott and Free Press, and we went to every Michigan governor's grave, they're all very, you know, like Rich, Governor Rich, who was the Speaker of the House, Mr. Power, this will appear. And you can just hit it from all the small communities. That's because, again, remember, agriculture played a major role in people's lives, in traffic and stuff like this. So you had that, you know, kind of an attitude. Now we're just in the early years, you know, 25–30% of the people lived on farms. Now we're down to 2% in this country. 2% of our population lives on farms. And being a Montanan, I noticed this when I go back. I'll be going back May 8th, and we're going to. I'm only live about 80 miles from Glacier Park. And when we go up to Glacier, you'll go by and you'll see these giant farms, corporate farms now, in Montana. Bit for flax, for hops, and you'll see giant storage tanks, actually, they're storage tanks. That's Budweiser Light and all of this. You know, and it seems so funny in this rural, obscure area of Montana where that would happen. But Lansing, as you know, is probably is the center for publicity in the state. There's more news comes out of Lansing except for one other city. What do you think that city is? What other city? Even with the legislature here. What other city gets more publicity than Lansing? Detroit. Detroit. Why?
Bigger.
Well, bigger, but not necessarily. Because you got all the action here with the Capitol, you got the university, you got Oldsmobile and stuff. What do they have in Detroit? It's the home offices of who? General Motors, Chrysler, Ford. You know, you have to throw in Dearborn, Detroit area, because, you know, they were originally in Detroit. And UAW. And so you have all those major areas. And you realize that the auto industry, and that's why in Lansing right now there's such concern, what's going to happen with General Motors, and there's a good possibility we'll get another plant. But the big concern is that 1 out of every 7 Americans works in a job-related field to the automobile. 1 out of 7 employed people. And that's related areas. You know, the tire companies, and, you know, all the auto companies and the suppliers and all of these people. And that's what they figure. And they remember the old saying in economics? When Detroit sneezes, America catches a cold. And that's true, because America's economy is probably, as much as any single thing, is centered on the automobile, which changed America probably more than any other single happening. And I would include television, because you now had mobility where people can move. And now, of course, you have computers. And I think at my age, and I'm getting older than dirt, and I look back and I say, you know, look at the period of the 50s as one example I look at. How did we exist? We didn't have any of these things. We did have cars in Montana, but we didn't have all of these, you know, all of these microwaves and all this kind of stuff. And God, people were healthy and didn't shoot each other. We had a thing in those early years called families. I mean, it was an interesting time. But history changes a lot of things. And I think this house, the importance of the Turner House, is that it's one of the remnants of early governors, a governor candidate or someone in major statewide politics. Of course, Turner was a lumber baron, as they refer to him, and had been active in local politics, as had other members. But they were pretty much, for the most part, except for James Turner, behind the scenes. And they controlled, you know, so much as business people. And the reason I say this is that I think that when Hollister became mayor, that he understands that if you're going to have a city that's going to run and will be effective, you have to have business behind you. There's no way you can come in and say, we're not going to get business. You have business, and he's been very effective in being able to do that. So I think that's been kind of a method there. But the city of Lansing, starting with City in the Forest, and bringing all the people that we've had in the city, it's also interesting to note, how many presidents do you think we've had visit the state, visit Lansing, while they were president? You know how many? Anybody guess? Come on, recently. Who do we have?
Oh, yeah, Ford.
Yes. Not, Ford, I don't believe, was ever in Lansing when he was president. It was afterwards. It was afterwards, not as president. Clinton was here as president. Bush. And the one that should be right on the tip of your tongue. Didn't you realize Theodore Roosevelt was here? Oh, okay. You remember. Theodore Roosevelt, when he drove down Michigan Avenue in the 1908 reel, and with the president of Michigan State University, is one of the classic pictures of all times. Again, being the capital, we've had all the candidates come. And we had Eisenhower. Remember, Eisenhower spoke at the Constitutional Convention when we had that in 63, excuse me. And so Eisenhower was here, and then we had other candidates that have come in. But it's interesting that we haven't. By the way, when we had the famous debate that was here in the state, of course, was Clinton and Bush and Ross Perot. Remember Ross Perot? Mm-hmm. Okay. And the three of them, and as an instructor at Lansing Community College, had students went to both the Perot and the Bush events afterwards. If you recall, Clinton went down to the University of Ann Arbor, and that's where he spent his that evening. And so I thought that was good for the debates, and then of course it was a highlight too when we had the debate at Michigan State University. And so that was kind of good. A lot of history in Lansing, and the political history, the legislatures, where people lived. G. Menon Williams, for example, was governor for 12 years. And we never had a residency for a governor. I mean, they had to provide their own residencies. And one of the places that he lived was the Cooley House. And then the pillared house that's over behind the Lansing State Journal in that area. And John Swainson, who was governor, lived over in Apple Tree Lane in Delta Township. But you have to find, mainly they stayed in hotels because they were not long, they did not serve for a long time. And then Lansing played a major role in the Civil War. And Governor Blair, who was from Jackson, but spent a great deal of time here, organized and funded and got $100,000 to form the 1st Michigan Volunteer Infantry. And it was made of Lansing, Mason, then we had the 7th Michigan out of Mason area. All of these various units, and we were the second state to respond to Lincoln's request. And supposedly, that's how we got the name, is that the Massachusetts 6th went through Baltimore. Remember, they were shot at, and a couple through the kill. But from the west, the second unit to come in was the 1st Michigan Volunteer Infantry. And Lincoln said when they came in, that company, when they came in, he said, "Thank God for the Michiganders." Now again, we will always have that debate. Are we Michiganians or Michiganders? Do you guys have any preference? Would you prefer being a gander?
I prefer being a gander.
You prefer being a gander.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, but when you look at history and you look at the war effort, you take this whole area of politics in World War II. Lansing was a major industry area because, as you know, they converted all the plants. And I think the Oldsmobile plants were primarily, they made torpedo heads, they made machine guns, and equipment like this, and they made some bombs. You go up to Greenville, and the famous refrigeration company up there, they turned all their efforts over. And then we don't think of a lot of things, but in the Lansing area, not particularly Lansing, but in World War II, we had prison internment camps for Germans. Do you realize that? Michigan had about 50. And they were around the surrounding area. South of St. John's, they had camps, Shiawassee, and up in Alma, in that area, big time. Because first of all, who's going to do the work with our troops, the boys going over abroad? So they shipped German prisoners over here. And, and they were guarded, and they were put in camps and everything else. But they said, well, they could escape. Well, can you imagine them escaping? Heinrich von Schnuckels, you know, and what are they going to say at their first stop? You know, this type of thing. Because they don't have, you know, they tried it in Arizona. And of all the places to try to escape, Arizona with that, you know, and it never happened. A lot of them stayed here. A lot of them went back to Germany, came back, married American women, and our ancestors are still here today. But that was something, we don't think about some of those kinds of things that we had in our history here. And Lansing is, I think, the new capital, as I call it, with the restoration. It was built for about $1 million, $1.5 million, something like that. And to refurbish the capital was $55 million. $55 million just to refurbish the house inside it. And as you know, we've got a whole new system downtown that we've been going down Capitol Avenue and caught some of the work that's going on. That's what the legislators need, of course, bigger offices. And but they'll take that. They're taking that whole area, all the water and light offices, etc. And probably in not too long after we demolish that great Lansing City Hall and we built the structure we have now, I would guess in the future there'll be a different city hall. I think it's just a matter of time that the legislature will have that complete area down there. So the downtown section. So those are just a few comments on it, and I'd be happy to ask for any questions that anybody might have on some of the things about politics in Lansing. Mayors are terrific. We've had some very unique mayors. One of them found jumbo for Barnum. You know, this type of thing, the elephant. And of course, you know, in my life, I've spent a lot of time in politics and working with circuses, and I found either training is suitable for the other on that basis, and what have you. But this has been a very interesting development for a new town. I mean, this, again, I say town, because it was new compared to the early areas that, and in fact, this whole settlement area was pretty much started in about 1835, what have you, because when we became a state, these counties became like Eaton County and became incorporated pretty much. So those are the few comments that I have. If you have any questions, we have to entertain.
All right, well, thank you very much for being with us for Meet You City.